Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. I am Noor Abdi. I head the Agriculture Global Practice team at the Islamic Development Bank. I'll be moderating the session today. Today's webinar is the last of a series webinars that we are organizing in the lead up to IDB group annual meetings that will take place from the 1st to the 4th of June in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. This webinar is live broadcasted on YouTube as well, and is jointly organized by the Islamic Development Bank and the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, ICBA, based in Dubai, UAE. But before we start the session, may I request our technical team, if you could please play the Quran recitation. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
Subhanallah al-Azim. I would like to thank you again to all of you for joining. I would like to extend a special welcome to our eminent speakers, whom I will introduce later. I thank you also to our participants who have joined the session, both on Zoom and on YouTube. During the session today, we will attempt to shed light on some of the emerging global challenges that have direct bearing on global food security in our member countries, but also identify pathways to sustainable food systems. We will particularly discuss the role of agri-research, innovations, and agribusiness play in building resilient food systems to address the post-COVID challenges our member countries are facing. The webinar will be for 2 hours. We will have 2 segments. One session, the first session, we will hear from our Vice President, Country Operations, Dr. Mansour Mukhtar, who is currently joining us from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Then we will go over to Nairobi, Kenya, to hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Agnes Kalibata. In the second half of the webinar, we will have a panel discussion followed by Q&A session, and then with the closing remarks from Dr. Tarifa Az-Zaabi, the acting DG and the Deputy DG of ICBA, who is our technical partner co-organizing this session today. So without further ado, let me welcome our Vice President, Dr. Mansour Mukhtar. The floor is yours, sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my warmest greetings from the picturesque city of Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt as we gather here for the 47th annual meetings of the Islamic Development Bank Group. I begin my opening remarks by first extending my warm welcome to our keynote speakers, Excellencies, the Ministers of Agriculture from Uganda and Benin, and the other eminent panel members who are with us today. Thank you for joining us at this important and timely event, which is being organized as an annual meetings side event webinar. This webinar is timely, particularly in the context of the ongoing crisis in Eastern Europe. The Russia-Ukraine war has resulted in adverse impacts that cascaded in the food market, manifested by supply shortages and high prices of commodities. A recent report from McKinsey reports that Ukraine and Russia jointly supply 30% of the world's wheat. A disruption in the global supply chain of wheat and other food products, of course, such as corn, barley, and sunflower oil, a base of the diet. These constitute the base of the diet of many populations, therefore threatens food security in many countries, especially those reliant in food imports. Among ISDB member countries, 36 out of 57 member countries are net food importers. As such, the ISDB is closely monitoring the situation along with its direct and indirect impacts on our member countries. In this context, the title of the webinar, Beyond Recovery, Leveraging ARD Innovations and Agro-preneurships to Safeguard Food and Nutrition Security, speaks to the importance of agricultural research, innovations, and private sector contributions in addressing the multiple challenges our member countries are facing while in relation to their food and nutrition needs. In recent years, our member countries in general have made significant progress in improving food and security situation, as well as reducing poverty. We have also witnessed significant gains in food security and poverty reduction across the developing world during the period from 2011 to 2018. Thanks to 2 decades of accelerated investment and economic growth, gains in productivity and technological advances have contributed to more efficient resource use in agriculture, thus improving food security in our member countries. These gains, however, are being reversed by multiple and overlapping crises, including the persistent impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on the global supply chain disruptions, the current food and energy high inflation cycle, the accelerated impacts of climate change and correlated rising temperatures, and the current conflicts and civil unrest in several parts of the world. As I mentioned earlier, the conflict in Ukraine, combined with the rising energy costs, have increased global food prices to levels not seen in recent years. According to FAO, food prices soared 75% on average compared to mid-2020 levels, surpassing the 2008 and 2011 records. The continuous rise in the prices of food and agricultural inputs is also posing a significant threat to developing countries' fragile state of post-COVID recovery. The crises are further exacerbating disproportionately the food insecurity in many countries around the world. This is the case, for example, in Egypt and Nigeria, ISDB's most populous member countries. Egypt and Nigeria are the first and fourth world's largest importers of wheat, respectively. In April 2022, Nigeria's grain reserves reduced by 50%, according to its Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. And Egypt's physical supply is at risk as it imports 85% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Our member countries' agriculture and economies are also highly vulnerable to climate change and rising temperatures. Across the Middle East, the Sahel region, and the Horn of Africa, rural communities, farmers, and pastoralists are facing the reality of living with prolonged and frequent droughts. For many countries, climate change has therefore escalated the existing problems facing agriculture, and indeed has further compounded them because of limited financial resources to cope, adapt, or recover. In the Sahel region, within 3 years, the number of people facing starvation increased from 3.6 million to 10.5 million. In the Horn of Africa, 20 million people are facing risks of starvation due to prolonged droughts. Climate variability, droughts manifested in droughts and seasonal floods have reduced the core agricultural zone and made agricultural planning very difficult. Considering the above, building a resilient agricultural system, including through pooling together public and private sector resources to advance scientific and technological innovations, is essential to respond adequately to the impact of climate change. To address these multiple overlapping crises, earlier this year, and beginning the ISDB launched a major strategy update and realignment exercise, One of the major objectives is to adapt and adjust its activities and investment priorities with emerging challenges in order to better assist our member countries build back better the economies as well as boost priority of their populations. The strategy, which covers the period 2023 to 2025, aims to focus on three broad strategic objectives. First is boosting recovery, and second is tackling poverty and building resilience, and the third axis is driving green economic growth. The focus of the bank's intervention in the next 3 years will be on two key and focused pillars, which are green, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure and inclusive human capital development. In this regard, the bank in the coming 3 years plans to intensify its support to the member countries, especially in Africa, with a focus on building resilient and climate-smart agriculture systems that enhance agricultural productivity and food security, improving smallholder access to remunerative markets, and investing in agriculture and commodity value chains that will develop and support agro-entrepreneurship and generate employment opportunities for youth and women. Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates, let me state that Islamic Development Bank Group was built on the foundation of solidarity and with the aim of fostering development in member countries. It has an obligation to respond to the urgent needs of its shareholders based on available resources and capabilities. The bank will strive to take advantage of technological advances to build a better future for our member countries, to support increases in productivity and promote inclusive and sustainable growth. I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to join us and wish you all the best in your deliberations. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Mansour, for the high points and shedding light on the multiple correlated factors, what you call multiple overlapping factors that are currently impacting our food systems. Thank you also for speaking to the bank's strategy 2023-2025 priority areas of boosting socioeconomic recovery, tackling poverty, and driving green economic growth. We also heard from you, Your Excellency, that we at this session will be looking forward to the recommendations and the outcome of today's deliberation that will inform the implementation of the strategy. Once again, thank you, Your Excellency. Before we go to the keynote speaker, can we take the group photo? Shia and the team, the technical team, can we please proceed and have that group photo session? May I ask everybody to turn their cameras on, please?
Thank you very much, Brother Noor. Do we have everyone on board? Okay, so on count of 3, everybody smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rashia. I will introduce our keynote speaker. We'll move to the second session of the webinar. Allow me to give the floor to Dr. Kalibata. Dr. Kalibata, she is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the Food Systems Summit. She is the president of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, known as AGRA. She served as Rwanda's Minister of Agriculture and Animal Resources from 2008 to 2014 and began her tenure as a president of AGRA in 2014. She is a global thought leader on agriculture and ag research. Dr. Kalibata, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for those introductory remarks. Excellencies, honorable ministers, thank you for having me here today. I particularly want to thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Mansour, for the remarks you just gave, because many of the things I'm going to say are very aligned to what you just said, and I'm extremely also grateful to the key pillars of the strategy that you called out, which are going to be very aligned to the presentation that I made. So if I could have the presentation, my presentation really anchored around the three critical areas. I will not go into the depth of the, next slide. I'll not go into the depth of the challenges we have because you have covered them extremely well, Dr. Mansour, but I'll just highlight that, for Africa, if I speak from where I'm at, this has been just a cycle of one challenge after another, all the way from 2014 to now, where we started experiencing droughts and floods, and COVID-19. And before COVID-19, if you live in Eastern Africa, the locusts and locust invasions and fall armyworm, and then of course now the Ukraine crisis, which followed very closely to the rise in fuel and gas prices and fertilizer prices. This has left a mark in two specific areas. The debt burden that we see in countries today is unbelievable. In African countries, more than 20 countries have a debt burden that is greater than 50% of their GDP. And I know you know this, your Islamic Development Bank, you work with these people every day. But then also the level of vulnerability that is in our system, the way it was highlighted and profiled and put to bear for all of us to see is something that is unbelievable, especially from a food system perspective. When we look at the number of people that are living outside the ability to have a decent meal and are living outside an appropriate nutrition. This is probably the time we've had the highest number of people that are suffering from food-related challenges. Next slide. Many people have stepped forward, and I'm glad you just called out your strategy that shows very clearly how the Islamic Development Bank is stepping forward. Here I had just called out some of the more recent announcements around what the US has just announced, I think 2 weeks ago, 30 billion to deal with all these challenges. We have the African Development Bank, 1.5 billion. Excuse me, I have a challenge of allergies, and I didn't want to let you all down because I had already booked in. And then we also had IFAD step forward with its resilience support system, and then you as Islamic Development Bank have also just called out what you're doing. So there are so many people that are trying to do different things, and the African Union is really trying to stay on top of coordination to ensure that these efforts are being put together, but also countries know that these efforts are being put together. Next slide. But all this is coming on the heels of a food system summit, a pretty successful food system summit that I would say, which was called by the UN Secretary General, recognizing that if we are going to come through on the SDGs, which is now 8 harvests away, we are going to have to implement a food systems approach for 3 reasons. The first one being that our agricultural systems are part of the problem. We are contributing 30% to emissions, 8% of which come from food waste. We are increasingly, again, excluding people. Our food system is increasingly excluding people, especially women and youth. And then, of course, the safety of our food. With 1.3 in every 3 people, only 1 having the ability to have a decent nutrition, and 1 in every 5 deaths happening as a result of diet-related diseases. The Secretary General thought that maybe we need to look at what's broken in our food systems. While our food systems are really feeding us and have done a great job of ensuring affordability and availability of food in many places, they've also come with lots of challenges, which are underscored here. The African continent did engage very well. We do have a common position coming from the African continent, which I'll come back to in a second. But here I just wanted to call out that 77 member states stepped forward to commit to a food systems transformation. That 7 of those member states are on the African continent. And I will tell you a little bit about it. Next slide. The reason I'm saying this is your Islamic Development Bank, and some countries will be stepping forward saying they want a food systems support system. they'll come to you looking for funding from a food system perspective. And I just want to make sure that you understand where they're coming from. I think the biggest takeaway from the food system was the fact that millions of people were engaged, millions of ideas came out. The scientific group, which is going back to the real basis of this meeting here, the role of science, was very clear. We had a scientific group that was very clear on the role of science as the pillar that we have to anchor policy, but they were also very clear at the fact that we are underinvested in science and research. We're investing less than 1% in an area that is so critical, so crucial, because the rate at which things are changing means that we need to be innovating and innovating very fast. Next slide. Here, I just want to highlight for you all the fact that in addition to what the scientific community came up with, which you see in the bottom right corner, there was also an African common position, and some of the things they are bringing out will resonate to some of the things you said, Dr. Mansour. But the need for agricultural productivity, increasing agricultural productivity, was reiterated. The need to tackle climate change and vulnerability that are associated with it. The need to center everything around the free continental trade area, a function of free continental trade area. The need to anchor everything in science and technology. And then the need to ensure that we build sustainable food systems that recognize the nexus between environment, human, and prosperity. Next slide. If I were funding a food system transformation, I just want to highlight some of the things that came out, how people are looking at some of the things that came out for you. So for example, under nutrition, a number of coalitions emerged and things that people were very much interested in, and some of the things you keep hearing are things like zero hunger. There is a Zero Hunger Coalition that is anchored in the private sector. It has already started mobilizing significant resources. There's a Healthy Diet Coalition, School Feeding Coalition, and Food and Loss, Reducing Food Waste and Loss Coalition, just to mention a few. And when you look at some of the food system strategies coming out of countries, you will see some of those ideas. And then in each case, under each action area, there are also what we called game-changing ideas, which are what countries are proposing. Next slide. We came to the agreement that whatever the case, these countries, the presidents did present pathways, which we call big ideas. These countries are going to break them down and understand what the gaps are. But most importantly, they are going to have to think through how to coordinate across sectors, because the food system perspective is about multi-sectoral coordination and multi-sectoral engagement. And we've started looking at what some of that means. Next slide. So this is just a sense of some of the things we are trying to see come out. In the institution I did, Agro has started doing analysis across some of the countries and trying to understand how we would pull a food system strategy together for countries. And again, it's not difficult to do the analysis and understand what things from an environmental perspective are broken that need to be brought together, and what's the science and evidence that anchors that for them to be appropriate investment areas. That is being pulled together. What we see as one critical challenge that we are going to have to address as we go is the whole idea of how we coordinate around sectors, given that sectors are funded independent of each other. Next slide. Excuse me. But all that happens in an area where probably our generation is best defined by how innovative we've been. And every problem that has been thrown to us also has a solution, mostly because a number of us, or many of us, or different people in different places are working around the clock to find answers. This one, when you look at how we are thinking about productivity in Africa now and the global perspective, there's this whole thing around we need to reduce fertilizer use, which is very true. We don't want to repeat some of the mistakes we've made from a green evolution perspective. But we also have the most degraded soils in the world. As a continent, we have the most degraded soils in the world. So how do we combine those perspectives that seem to be opposing? One of the things we are doing in the institution that I lead is to look at microdosing as one way of, and we are not the only one. There are a number of institutions that are looking at that. But microdosing is an innovation that allows fertilizers to be applied where the plant will find them, and while really saving a whole lot of nutrients. It also reduces the cost for the farmer, the amount of fertilizer they get to use. Next slide. Of course, one of the two innovations that came up a lot in the Food System Summit were agroecology and regenerative agriculture. They don't mean the same. They may be related, but they don't necessarily mean the same. But one of the things I keep saying, regenerative agriculture is something that we've always done in the African context or African perspective, but we really have not tried to quantify it or even quantified it in a way that can talk about the carbon reserves that we are rebuilding in our soils. Because if there's one thing that we must invest in going forward, it's rebuilding soils, especially in the African continent, and rebuilding our ecology. So agroecology, some of it through reforestation, some of it through combining agriculture and other agroecological activities, is going to be some of the things that we looked at in the summit that could provide answers to some of the challenges we are looking at. Next slide. We work also in an area where biodiversity and really securing diversity through seed systems is extremely important. Here I highlight how seed, which is an area that Agro works in very well, how seed is really cuts across all the areas that are critical to the action tracks, the 5 action tracks of the Food System Summit, and are critical to a healthy food system. But our biodiversity loss stands at 80% today, meaning that we risk the ability to really take advantage of some of these God-given opportunities to turn them into innovations. Next slide. Here, I talk about institutional innovations. There are also institutional innovations. Not all innovations are going to be technological based. Here, we've been thinking about how to deliver an integrated approach to farmers. And what we've been trying to do is to bring all entrepreneurs in one locality, sometimes completely new geographies, and de-risk them to be in places they've never been, but really ensure that a farmer that has access to seed, has access to fertilizers, has access to markets. And of course, if he has access to the 3, I didn't mention, and extension, if he has access to the 4, most likely chances are he will have access to finance as well. So all those are anchored, of course, by looking at the policy environment and looking and really understanding if the environment is working for private sector, environment is working for the neighboring business that you would be wanting for private sector. And when all that happens, productivity is just one thing. We really want to make sure that productivity is anchored in sustainability as well. Next slide. We did that in a number of countries. Here gives you an example of Tanzania. I don't want to go through all these slides, but I'll tell you one thing. For every dollar we invested of philanthropic resources, which is the money that Agro uses, philanthropic money, most of it, and bilateral resources, for every dollar that we invested, private sector invested $12. As long as we positioned that dollar to de-risk private sector, and we de-risk them in 2 ways: extension and the distribution networks, village level distribution networks, where they don't have to worry about establishing distribution networks. Next slide. So if you look at what the number of things we could do to influence things we could do to ensure that we support communities where they are at. One thing I haven't put here that is extremely important is we just need to start reaching those communities now. There are places in West Africa where they are coming into season now. We could help them ensure that the next 6 months they produce something, the next 1 year they produce something, that they don't have to be part of those people that are going to be hungry, especially if the rains come. So really being able to pay attention to the seasonality as it comes on board, because it's extremely important. and making sure that those farmers have access to seeds and fertilizers would make a whole lot of difference in some of these countries. There are systems in place. There are seed businesses. I know that because we've been building seed businesses to ensure that they are available to farmers. There are fertilizer businesses that can take these fertilizers to farmers. And of course, there are governments. You work through governments. As Islamic Development Bank, you work a lot through governments and finding ways to reach these farmers. I think here the issue is time is of essence. Just to make sure that every drop of rain that comes next is not wasted is going to be extremely important. And then, of course, finding new ways of providing extension and reaching farmers is going to have to be one of the things we innovate around and be creative, because we know that most of these things, especially the extension system, is not working very well in many of these countries. Next slide, and I'll be finishing. We've worked with the Islamic Development Bank in Burkina Faso. There are good examples there. I'm extremely proud of the work we've done, especially because we've created in that work we've done, we've created over close to 90,000 jobs in that engagement. The flagship we have with Burkina Faso on rice. So there are partnerships. I just wanted to highlight here that through partnerships, we can get to do so much more, and we look forward to those type of partnerships. Next slide. I'll skip this slide. I've talked through it mostly. Here, the anchor is technology, sustainability, using technology to ensure sustainability, really speaking to the things that you talked about, Dr. Mansour, in your strategy going forward. Next slide, which is my last slide, is I look forward to listening to you all. I hope that these slides have catalyzed some thinking. I really wanted to make sure that even as we are thinking about innovations, research, and how to come through, we recall and put at the center the food system conversation, because productivity and increasing productivity alone is not going to be sufficient. We are impacting the environment, we're impacting people and people's health. It's costing us so much money. I didn't even begin to talk about the true cost of food, which is really health and environment, so which we can start getting out from. So I emphasized a lot on the food systems approach to this work, and I hope that this becomes part of the thinking of what is going on now in the meetings that you have. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and I look forward to the conversations.
Thank you, Dr. Kalibata, for the insights. You highlighted the complexity of the issue around food systems in our member countries. It was interesting to know that you spoke about the debt burden and the stress most of our member countries have with respect to project financing. You also highlighted the state of fragility, and especially in the least income food deficit countries. We have millions of livelihoods perished during the COVID, and now we do have this rise in inflation in terms of food, but not only food, but also price of inputs, especially fertilizers. One question, Dr. Kalibata, our advantage as multilateral development bank, as a development financing bank, we do have the advantage of bringing a significant amount of resources to these problems. From where you sit, what can be a recommendation from you in addressing those challenges? How could the Islamic Development Bank assist member countries address these multiple challenges, the issue that is becoming more complex given the problems that you have highlighted? If you were to provide a key recommendations, what would that be?
Thank you. I think the challenges we fall in probably two categories. Of course, there's the immediate, like Dr. Mansour highlighted, there are people that are hungry today. They need food. Whatever the case, we need to help and intervene and ensure that those people have food. But the thing that I'm most worried about is the fact that we are sitting in a challenging environment from a food system perspective, and every time communities get challenged, they resort to the environment, right? They resort to the environment. When they don't have fertilizers now, fertilizer prices are so high farmers use more environment. They are going to that piece of land that had been conserved or that was preserved, that looks fertile. It's what they are going to use, right? The lack of fuel that we see in some of these countries are leading to some more wood being cut so that they can get fuel. So I think for me, the biggest investment we could make right now is to ensure that we are helping farmers increase productivity. You've been doing this already. Ensure that farmers have access to improved seeds and fertilizers. Ensure that as we do so, we are strengthening resilience. Some of these seeds have the ability to strengthen resilience. Ensure that some of these technologies that are introducing climate-friendly ways of working with soil and working in the landscape are being used, because we don't want to create a vicious cycle of challenges. You don't want to be in a situation where we use the environment in ways that deteriorate the environment further. So, and then create even more challenges. So yes, we keep saying we are not responsible for the deterioration of the climate, but we can do something about reviving our environment so that the environment is a little bit more resilient as the climate deteriorates. So that would be my sense. Let's invest in strengthening the resilience of farming households so that they can be able to deal with climate change and they can be able to deal with the challenges we have today. And we avoid the vicious cycle of destroying environment and environment destroying climate and such.
Dr. Angus, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we thank you for joining us during this session. Because of the time, we'll move to the second part of the webinar, which is the panel discussion. If anybody has a question for Dr. Agnes, please put it into the chat or the Q&A. Sorry, chat is disabled, I was told. You can actually put your questions into the Q&A box. We move to the second session of the webinar, which is a panel discussion. We have a high-profile panel members with members representing the policy makers, stakeholders from the policy makers, researchers, and the private sector. We are very delighted to have ministers from Uganda and Benin. Your Excellencies, welcome to the meeting. We do have also, let me briefly introduce the speakers. I will be very short. I do have a long list of panel members and we will try to be very economical with the time. We do have Minister Fred Bueno. He's a Minister of State at the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries in Uganda. He is also a member of a parliament, and in that capacity, he is a member of a parliament's Leadership Committee on Science, Technology and Innovation. Welcome, Your Excellency. We do have we do have a Minister of Agriculture from Benin, Dr. I cannot see it, my screen here. Minister Gaston, thank you, Your Excellency, for joining us. He is the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries from Benin. We do have Dr. Abdelhakim El-Wa'ar, who is an FAO Assistant Director General and the Regional Representative for the Near East and North Africa. Prior to joining FAO, Dr. Abdelhakim was with the bank and African Union, where he held high senior position administrative in his capacity as a Director of Partnership at the bank, but also as a Director of Human Resources at the African Development, at the African Union. We do have representative from the private sector. We do have Dr. Moulay Lahsan El-Nahli, who is charged the mission to the CEO of OCP Africa. He's Moroccan. He held various positions, senior positions, prior to joining OCP at the African Development Bank as representative of the bank in a number of countries, including Mali and Gabon. We do have also Mr. Ajit Jam, the Vice President of Oil and Food Industries, and he's also the head of the business unit at the cocoa and coffee beans in Cote d'Ivoire. He has extensive expertise in commodity value chains. Ajit has also helped set up a lot of supply chain and value chain enterprises in the continent. And finally, not the least, of course, we do have Dr. Celso Moretti. He is the president of Embrapa, the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. since 2019 and has been with Imbraba since 1994, where he held different executive positions. He has extensive international experience, and he's also a member of different boards, including ICBA's board. Last year, he received Norman Borlaug Award in the category of sustainability. And we do have Mr. Saad Al-Ansar. He is the senior advisor to the Minister of Agriculture in Egypt, the host country of the annual meetings of the Islamic Development Bank this year in Sharm el-Sheikh. Let me welcome our panel members. Can you please confirm if we do have the ministers in the call? Ishraq?
We do not have Mr. from Benin.
Bien sûr, au Bénin, je suis en ligne.
Okay, welcome, Your Excellency. Can we please turn our cameras on? I don't see everybody, the panel members. Okay, yeah, I see everyone now. Welcome again. In this session, I will be putting questions to you, Your Excellencies, in the rotation where you appear on the program. The first set of questions will go to the ministers, policymakers on global issues affecting food security. Then I will go to FAO, Imbraba, OCP, and Olam in that order. Your Excellency, Minister from Benin, we know that agriculture is a key and a major contributor to the gross domestic product of our member countries, as well as a source of employment and foreign exchange for many countries in the continent. We also do see agriculture being put in the center of these current global challenges, where we have to produce more food and generate a lot of employment for the youth, but also, of course, address the issue of climate change in terms of promoting adaptation. From where you sit, Your Excellency, can you please talk to us what are the key challenges that you're facing now with respect to these current challenges, and how are you solving those problems? Excellency, the floor is yours. Minister Gaston, you are muted. And for everybody, we do have interpretation.
Merci infiniment pour cette opportunité que vous nous offrez de pouvoir parler à ce panel et à tous les invités, toutes les hautes personnalités. Dr Kalibata, heureux de vous revoir encore ici à ce panel, et à vous tous de la Banque islamique de développement. Merci. Les défis majeurs pour les résoudre, nous devons quand même mener des réformes importantes. D'abord, je confirme avec vous que le secteur agricole est important et prépondérant dans l'économie béninoise aujourd'hui. Et cette importance se mesure sur 3 dimensions. La première, c'est la contribution donc du secteur à l'économie nationale. C'est la part de la population active qui est employée dans ce secteur-là et le rôle déterminant que joue la production locale dans la sécurité alimentaire de nos populations. Bien plus, vous savez très bien que l'agriculture constitue l'un des principaux secteurs sur lesquels repose en fait le développement et les capacités des pays à exporter un certain nombre de produits pour au moins servir, assurer le service de la dette et surtout financer les importations de biens. Fort de ça, sur le plan économique, dans mon pays, par exemple, l'agriculture représente environ 36% du PIB. Il fournit 80% des recettes officielles d'exportation et emploie plus de 50% de la population active. La production céréalière du Bénin permet de couvrir à peu près 182% de nos besoins. La différence est nettement mise sur le marché régional, très demandeur, surtout lorsque nous savons les défis majeurs auxquels nous sommes confrontés aujourd'hui, l'insécurité dans la région, les changements climatiques et puis les problèmes de déficit alimentaire global que nous avons dans notre sous-région ici. Les défis à relever, c'est d'abord et après tout assurer la résilience de nos systèmes alimentaires. Pour ce faire, nous devons permettre à l'agriculture de jouer sa fonction économique en élevant la productivité, comme l'a dit beaucoup de panélistes tout de suite, en produisant suffisamment de matières premières pour que l'industrie domestique puisse s'élever et permettre de créer de la valeur. Il faut aussi assurer la régularité de l'offre alimentaire. Nous devons faire face, si vous voulez, aux effets néfastes des chocs exogènes. En effet, Covid est passé par là, vous avez vu ce que ça donne. La crise russo-ukrainienne est un problème auquel nous devons faire face aujourd'hui. C'est fort de tout ça que, au premier mandat du président Patrice Talon, nous avons analysé la situation de notre agriculture et nous nous sommes dit qui trop embrasse mal les traits. Les régions ne sont pas les mêmes. Le pays s'étend du sud au nord sur près de 700 km. Il va falloir utiliser les diversités climatiques, les diversités agro-pédologiques pour créer des bassins de production, des zones à vocation agricole sur les spéculations précises. C'est cela qui a consisté à créer 7 pôles de développement agricole pour nous attaquer à des filières particulières comme les filières à haute valeur ajoutée, l'ananas, l'anacarde, les cultures maraîchères, la filière coton, dans le cotton belt, bien entendu, les filières conventionnelles comme le riz, le maïs, le manioc, pour renforcer la disponibilité alimentaire et permettre même de dégager des surplus substantiels à placer dans la sous-région. Les filières émergentes que nous avons aujourd'hui comme le soja, le karité, la mangue et le palmier à huile. Bien entendu, nous n'avons pas occulté l'aquaculture et la filière viande, lait et œufs de table pour essayer de réduire notablement nos dépendances en matière de protéines vis-à-vis de l'extérieur. Je dois faire remarquer que les réformes entreprises par mon pays, le Bénin, ont pu se poser autour de certains piliers, 5 piliers importants. Le premier, c'est la maîtrise de l'eau. Que faire pour qu'on puisse pratiquer une agriculture résiliente au changement climatique? Par rapport à cela, nous avons fait des aménagements hydro-agricoles. Au jour d'aujourd'hui, nous avons quelques 26 000 hectares qui sont aménagés, mais nous avons engagé des études et nous venons de boucler une étude sur 12 000 hectares à aménager et dont une partie sera soumise à la BID très prochainement. Nous aurons à étudier 50 000 hectares pour nous permettre vraiment de maîtriser parfaitement la question de l'agriculture et aussi faire des points d'eau pour l'abreuvement de nos animaux. Le deuxième pilier important, c'est l'accès aux semences améliorées, aux intrants. Oui, pour chaque spéculation, nous avons mis en place une industrie semencière qui se base sur le secteur privé. Je dis bien le secteur privé. L'État, la recherche, produit les semences de pré-base, mais le reste est développé par un secteur privé productif. Par la suite, ces semences et les autres intrants qui accompagnent devaient être acquis à temps. C'est comme cette année où, dans la plupart des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, nous n'avons pas pu avoir des intrants. Le Bénin a pu se placer sur le marché international pour accueillir ces intrants au moment où les prix étaient encore soutenables. Mais l'économie du pays doit pouvoir soutenir l'accès facile de ces intrants aux paysans. L'autre chose, c'est l'amélioration des outils de travail, la question de mécanisation de l'agriculture, la question de modernisation de l'agriculture, avec la maîtrise de l'eau, l'irrigation, mais la mécanisation pour réduire la pénibilité du travail. De même, il y a la digitalisation qui est passée par là pour que certaines commandes de nos produits ne puissent pas être passées par des personnes intermédiaires et on réduit un peu les questions de détournement ou autres vices liés à la pratique de l'homme. Enfin, nous allons parler de la transformation locale des produits agroalimentaires. Le focus est mis sur au moins transformer 50% de nos produits Et bientôt, d'ici 2-3 ans, il y a un certain nombre de produits qui n'iront plus à l'exportation tant qu'on n'aura pas pu faire la transformation domestique. Ceci pour créer de la valeur ajoutée. Et pour faire ça, nous avons créé une zone économique spéciale avec beaucoup de facilités d'intégration et des facilités fiscales qu'on a créées. En fait, notre zone économique spéciale restera un hub industriel pour assurer la transformation de nos produits, notamment le cajou, le coton, le karité, l'ananas et pourquoi pas le soja. Enfin, la question de financement. L'agriculture doit être financée. Et par rapport à cela, nous avons essayé, avec la microfinance, de sortir les gens de l'informel, mais nous avons mis en place un fonds national de développement agricole qui a été doté de 100 milliards de francs CFA et avec lequel maintenant d'autres partenaires continuent par nous accompagner pour abonder, pour aider maintenant les gens à aller facilement à l'accès au crédit auprès des banques primaires. Là, le fonds assure la bonification, le fonds assure le refinancement au niveau des systèmes financiers décentralisés et le fonds assure la garantie à 50% de nos financements. Chers amis, c'est un peu sur ces piliers-là que nous avons bâti le système aujourd'hui pour que l'agriculture béninoise puisse se tenir encore bien. Dans tous les cas, les chocs exogènes ne sont pas tous prévisibles, mais avec des pratiques résilientes, nous pensons que nous pouvons vraiment résister à un certain nombre de contraintes. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for keeping it concise. I will request the rest of the panel members to really stay within 5 minutes, if possible. Let me move now. I don't know if we do have the minister from His Excellency, Mr. Bueno from Uganda. I don't see him in the list, but we do have Mr. Saad Al-Nassar, who is a senior advisor to the Minister of Agriculture in Egypt. Dr. Saad, the floor is yours. Same question to you. We heard from the Vice President now, one of the challenges that we have is all the impact of the East Europe crisis or civil unrest is the lack of all the disruption of supply chain of certain commodities. And some of the most populous countries in IDB constituency are feeling the brunt of these short or disrupted supply chain with respect to the commodities. How Egypt is faring and how or what are the institutional setups that you have in place in supporting the smallholder farmers contribute to the development of the food systems in your country? The floor is yours. Dr. Saad, are you with us? Can you hear me?
أيوة، هل تسمعونني؟
نعم.
مساء الخير. نتوجه بالشكر.
Dr. Saad, the connection is really bad. Okay, while we set that up, Ishraq, I hope we can resolve that issue. But before we do that, let me move to...
تواجه العديد من التحديات زي ما حضراتكم ذكرتوا، كوفيد-19، التغيرات المناخية، الأزمة الروسية الأوكرانية، وأثرت هذه الأزمات كلها على إمدادات الغذاء وعلى أيضا الأسعار العالمية للغذاء. يكفي أن نعرف أن سعر طن القمح كان قبل الأزمة الروسية الأوكرانية $250 للطن، أصبح الآن $435 للطن. أثرت أيضا على أسعار مدخلات الإنتاج، الأسمدة، الطاقة، وأثرت على إمدادات الغذاء. ومن هنا برزت أهمية العمل على زيادة إنتاج الغذاء محلياً. والحقيقة قطاع الزراعة في مصر بيعتبر ركيزة أساسية للاقتصاد القومي، بيساهم بحوالي 15% من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي، وحوالي 17% من الصادرات، و25% من القوى العاملة. وبيعيش في الريف أكثر من نص السكان، يعني أكثر من 50 مليون نسمة يقطنون في الريف ويعتمدون على الزراعة والأنشطة المرتبطة بها في حياتهم المعيشية. من أجل هذا القيادة السياسية في مصر بتولي هذا القطاع أهمية خاصة، وبتركز على ضرورة العمل على زيادة إنتاج الغذاء رأسيا وأفقيا، وبالذات من المحاصيل الغذائية الاستراتيجية. وأيضا الحكومة بتخصص نسبة أكبر من الاستثمارات الحكومية إلى قطاع الزراعة في السنوات الأخيرة، والدولة بتنفذ العديد من المشروعات القومية الزراعية الكبرى سواء في التوسع الأفقي والتوسع الرأسي. وزارة الزراعة أيضا بتساهم بتنفيذ استراتيجية التنمية الزراعية المستدامة في مصر في إطار رؤية مصر 2030، وفي رؤية الأهداف الأممية للتنمية المستدامة ال SDGs. تستهدف هذه الاستراتيجية زيادة درجة الأمن الغذائي، وزيادة الصادرات الزراعية، وتوفير فرص عمل للمرأة والشباب بالذات في القطاع الزراعي والأنشطة المرتبطة به، وأيضا تحسين دخول ومستوى معيشة السكان الزراعيين. الحقيقة مصر بتنفذ العديد من السياسات لمواجهة الأزمات العالمية مثل التغيرات المناخية وأزمة كوفيد والأزمة الروسية الأوكرانية. على سبيل المثال عندنا القمح، في السنة الأخيرة زادت المساحة المزروعة من القمح بحوالي 250 ألف فدان، وصلت إلى 3,650,000 فدان. الإنتاجية الفدانية وصلت إلى حوالي 19 أرداب بدلا من 18 أرداب في السنة السابقة. الإنتاج الكلي من القمح السنة دي اللي بدأنا حصاده في نص أبريل هيصل إلى حوالي 10 مليون طن. الدولة مستهدفة زيادة التوريد المزارعين إلى الحكومة حوالي ليصل إلى 6 مليون طن أو 5.5 مليون طن، بالمقارنة ب 3.5 مليون طن في العام الماضي. السعة التخزينية زادت في مصر من خلال أيضا المشروع القومي للصوامع من 1.4 مليون طن في سنة 2014 إلى 5.5 مليون طن السنة دي. المخزون الاستراتيجي من القمح كما أعلنت وزارة التموين بيكفي 4 شهور. لو أضيف إليه الذي سيورد من محصول القمح هذا العام، هيبقى عندنا قمح يكفي للاستهلاك حتى بداية العام القادم 2023. في نفس الوقت الدولة بتحاول زيادة إنتاج القمح عن طريق التوسع الأفقي. احنا عندنا مشروعات قومية للتوسع الأفقي، سواء في مشروع الدلتا الجديدة حوالي 1 مليون فدان، في سيناء نص مليون فدان، في الريف المصري 1.5 مليون فدان، يعني عندنا حوالي 3 مليون فدان جديدة. بنعتمد على ترشيد استخدام مياه الري في الأراضي القديمة عشان نوفر مياه نزرع بيها في الأراضي الجديدة. فالتوسع الأفقي ده هيساعد على زيادة المساحة المزروعة من القمح. في نفس الوقت دور البحث والتكنولوجيا والابتكار في قطاع الزراعة مهم جدا. عندنا مركز البحوث الزراعية، أكبر مركز بحثي زراعي في الشرق الأوسط، يعمل على استنباط أصناف جديدة عالية الإنتاجية والجودة ومقاومة للتغيرات المناخية والظروف المعاكسة زي الحرارة والجفاف والرطوبة وأيضا الأمراض والحشرات، مستهدفين زيادة إنتاجية الفدان من خلال تعميم هذه الأصناف وفقا للخريطة الصنفية المناسبة والممارسات الزراعية الجيدة ودور الإرشاد الزراعي، أن تصل إنتاجية الفدان إلى 22 أو 23 أرداب. وبالتالي من خلال التوسع الأفقي والتوسع الرأسي وأيضا ترشيد استهلاك القمح وتقليل الفقد، لأن الصوامع الجديدة زالت الفقد اللي كان بيحصل في التخزين في المخازن الترابية. كنا بنفقد سنويا حوالي 1 مليون طن، دلوقتي ما بنفقدش حاجة. من خلال كل هذه السياسات ممكن أن نصل إلى درجة اكتفاء ذاتي إن شاء الله من القمح 65%. الدولة طبعا بتشجع الإنتاج الاستثمار في قطاع الزراعة، بتعدل التشريعات الزراعية بما يشجع القطاع الخاص على الابتكار والأعمال التجارية وريادة الأعمال في قطاع الزراعة. بنعمل على تخفيف والتكيف مع التغيرات المناخية، ومصر تستضيف كوب 27، فخامة الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي أعلن أنه في هذا الكوب 27 المؤتمر العالمي للمناخ لن تتحدث مصر باسمها فقط، وإنما باسم كل الدول الأفريقية والدول النامية. وتحاول أن تلزم الدول المتقدمة المسؤولة عن التغيرات المناخية والتلوث بصفة عامة أن تفي بالتزاماتها وتتحمل فاتورة مساعدة الدول النامية في التكيف مع والتخفيف أثر التغيرات المناخية، وأيضا مساعدة الدول النامية والأفريقية بصفة خاصة على دعم البنية الأساسية اللازمة للتعامل مع التغيرات المناخية. دولة بتنظم أيضا التأمين الصحي للمزارعين، وأيضا بتفكر في عمل معاشات للمزارعين، بننفذ الزراعة التعاقدية، وأيضا بننفذ مشروع أكبر مشروع للتنمية الريفية في العالم وهو حياة كريمة، وهو تطوير حوالي 4500 قرية، حوالي أكثر من 50 مليون نسمة، وتوابعهم 35,000 كفر وعزبة ونجع بحوالي 700 مليار جنيه. الرئيس أعلن أن هذه الاستثمارات ممكن تصل إلى تريليون جنيه، هدفها تغيير وتحسين مستوى معيشة السكان الزراعيين والريفيين في مصر. طبعا كان الأسبوع اللي فات في مؤتمر منظمه الاتحاد البنك الأفريقي للتنمية مع الاتحاد الأفريقي، كان بيقترح إنشاء صندوق لمساعدة المزارعين وبالذات صغار المزارعين في الدول النامية على الحصول على الأسمدة والتقاوي والمبيدات والميكنة في ظل ارتفاع أسعار هذه المستلزمات. وهذا الصندوق يساهم فيه البنك الأفريقي، طبعا البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، وصناديق الأخرى سواء صناديق عربية أو صناديق أجنبية. أعتقد هذا الصندوق ممكن أن يكون مهم جدا في مساعدة الدول النامية وبالذات صغار المزارعين على الحصول على مستلزمات الإنتاج بأسعار معقولة، وأيضا دعم المؤسسات الزراعية سواء البحث العلمي أو الابتكار أو التنمية الريفية. شكرا لحضراتكم جميعا، ونتمنى لحضراتكم مؤتمر ناجح بإذن الله. شكرا.
Mr. Noor, your mic is muted.
Thank you for alerting me. Thank you, Dr. Saad, for highlighting some of these important insights as to what the government of Egypt is deploying to address the current challenges. And I took note that there is a vertical but also horizontal expansion in terms of production, but this will require definitely research, which we will go to speak about in a minute. But before we do that, let me invite Dr. Hakim Al-Wa'ar as an FAO Assistant Director General of FAO and the regional representative of the institution in Middle East and North Africa. Dr. Hakim, welcome. Good to see you again. Share with us some of the practical solutions to this, problem of food systems. You are in a region where you have high vulnerability in terms of climate change. A lot of smallholder farmers, scarcity of water. We do have civil unrest in some parts of the region. The challenges are mounting, but we also require smallholder farmers now to produce more to feed population in the region. We have young people leaving the farming sector to the urban areas, having increased poverty in the urban areas. So what are the, how can we take this solution to scale in terms of strengthening the food resiliency in the member countries, particularly in the region where you are? And if you can share some key messages and lessons from the FAO perspective. The floor is yours.
Noor, thank you very much for first inviting me to this very important panel and addressing a very important topic beyond recovery and leveraging innovation and in agri-food systems in particular to safeguard food and nutrition security. And thanks to His Excellency Dr. Mansour Mukhtar for hosting us today. And we thank all the panels, and it's good to see Agnes and their excellencies from the member countries. Let me start by the very important aspect related to SDG 1 on ending poverty and SDG 2 on zero hunger. Despite all the efforts global communities has put forward towards achieving these two SDGs in particular, we are still off track. Today is 2022. We have about 8 years to go to 2030, where we're supposed to achieve those two particular SDGs, and we are still off track. And the reason of being off track is that, regardless of all the efforts, is that we've been faced with a number of shocks that took us off track. We started in our region, in particular the Near East and North Africa, around 2011, with the uprisings that took place during the Arab Spring times, that took a lot of countries way back on their economies and led to a number of unrest that continue till today. Examples are Yemen, Syria, and others. And then also we faced with the COVID-19 that has faced major disruptions in the supply chains, and more recently, the Black Sea unrest and conflict between Russia and Ukraine that have resulted in another challenge of increase in food prices, shortage of food supplies, and also alert to the whole world that fragility does not have a specific geographical location. It's everywhere, and the whole world under COVID, as well as the Black Sea crisis, has shown that fragility does exist almost everywhere in the world, and we really need to review a lot of the policies and the efforts that we're taking globally in order to address those challenges. Food prices has gone up to alarming levels during the first part of this year due to the trying to recover from COVID-19, but also the Ukraine crisis in particular, where we've seen some prices went up to over 35% of basic foods such as wheat and maize and others. Now, in the region, we are also faced, besides the conflict and the unrests, the water scarcity has always been there, and the climate change. And this is all over the region as well as Africa. So when we don't need water, we are faced with floods, or when we need less water, we're faced with floods. And when we need water, we're faced with droughts. And that also alerts us that we need to really look at some investment in the infrastructure. And I'm pointing specifically to roles of specific development partners, such as the multilateral development partners. ISDB is among the main in the region, African Development Bank, and the other financial institutions. So focusing on water harvest and water resource management becomes essential. If we want to maintain good productivity and nutritious productivity, we really need to manage the water resources at the moment. And the reason is that the full reliance and dependence on rain-fed agriculture is not reliable anymore. And simply that is because of the climate variability affected by the climate change. Long-term does impact the way we produce food and the way we manage food. And unless we have control of the water, we will not be able to maintain our productivity levels. That is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, the investment in R&D, because we want to produce more with less resources. So we have hardship lands. We have, I see ECVA is taking part effectively in this session. More and more lands are becoming more saline, as well as the water itself and the quality of water. So we need to have more investment in the R&D aspect to be able to face these challenges at difficult times. We shouldn't forget, colleagues, that our agriculture in our region is mostly inherited. And because it's inherited with the old practices. Now, those old practices are not practical anymore and are not applicable anymore in light of the circumstances that I've just shared with you. The third aspect that is very important and extremely essential is the financing accessibility. Unfortunately, most of the affected area today of poverty and hunger lies in the rural area. And this is an area where access to finance is still very limited. And here there's a very important critical role to the financial development institutions, such as the ISDB, to ensure that accessibility to finance and financial inclusion through economic empowerment modalities and also other modalities. And the reasons are very simple, that we are still facing a $2.5 trillion annually of a gap to achieve the SDGs. And this cannot be done purely by ODA's assessment and an official assessment that is provided. Unless we can blend this to attract better private sector investment to support basic infrastructure, rural areas development, we won't be able to achieve the SDGs. And if we see the trend of engagement of the private sector attracted so far, it's not, the ODA managed to attract something around $50 billion from the private sector, but it solely goes to banking and financial services. We still need more investment in the rural area development. And in order to do that, here the MDPs have a key role in lowering risks and try to make the investment environment more inclusive and attractive to the private sector to be able to meet these demands and be able to partially close that gap. I want to highlight some of the examples where the ISDB has taken a good role in blended finance, such as the buy-down facility and the lives and livelihood funds that took place together with the private sector engagement from the Gates Foundation and others. And there are many other ways where ISDB group in general has been fully engaged. I think some of those success stories and lessons learned need to be expanded in order to cover the needed area. Today, if we focus on SDG 17, on partnership and get the communities and the development communities together, we, such as Food and Agriculture Organization and the other UN system, can assist in providing the right solutions to problems. But these solutions will still need financing for them to see light and to be implemented. And this is where we need to have a better coordination together. The FAO and its strategic framework that was recently endorsed by the FAO conference covers the area from 2022 to 2031, seeks to support the 2030 agenda through the transformation of agri-food systems. And here we talk about agri-food system. We're not talking anymore or only about agriculture and food security. So we talk about the full value chain of the agri-food systems to make it more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and achieving a better production, better nutrition, better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. Now, to achieve this, unless we do partner and cooperate with all development partners, we won't be able to achieve these goals in order to alleviate today's challenges. Last word, Noor and all colleagues, I think these shocks that we're facing today are wake-up alarms for all countries, development partners, for a more coordinated effort globally and regionally. We've seen the result of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which calls for more local actions. Doesn't have to be local at a country level, but it has to be local at the regional level. And countries need to come together in a closer regions and sub-regions and try to establish at least some kind of sub-regional self-sufficiency in terms of basic food productivities and complementary role in order to achieve this. At the FAO, we're working very closely with the countries in the region. We provide them with timely data and information to allow them to revise their policies to allow some at least basic level of self-sufficiency of basic foods in order to face any shocks or disruptions in the food supply chains in the future. And let me stop here and I'll be ready to take on any questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Hakim. We'll come back to you in the second round to all of you for a quick fire of question and for you to basically highlight key messages as the takeaways in the second round. But thank you for highlighting a couple of two important points, which is basically we need to change the way we do farming in the region if we need to be sustainable and develop the food systems, but also the importance of financing and the role the private sector and other partners should play and what could be done in terms of crowding in resources beyond the debt or the public financing. Thank you, Dr. Hakim. I will go to our research stakeholder, the president of Imbraba, Dr. Moretti. welcome again. We're glad to have you also. Everybody who spoke today spoke about the importance of research. There's no doubt that agricultural research is very critical in terms of raising productivity. If we were to produce more food, we have land that is becoming more scarce. We're having issues around availability of water. We need to feed more people by 2030. We need to feed 2 billion people more by 2050, which means we have to produce 60% more food. What lessons, being where you are as the head of the most prominent Southern research institution in the world, Brazil, Embrapa, what are the key messages that you think you would like to share with us in terms of improving how the research systems are run in the South, and learn from Brazil, particularly in Embrapa, in raising productivity of key commodities, the staples that millions of people rely on and grown by the smallholder farmers? I know it's a mouthful question, it's an open-ended, so I'll give you 5 minutes, then we'll do the second round of questions. Over to you, Dr. Moretti.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Na. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here. I would like to greet Dr. Mansour Muhtar, ISDB Vice President of Operations, and also my dear friend, Dr. Tarifa Al-Zabi, Actor Director General of ICBA, with the institution that I'm proud to be a member of the board. I have no doubt that agricultural research will play a key role on providing food security for the entire globe. We already saw this happening in Brazil during the last 5 decades. So we already saw how research, development, and innovation transformed Brazil and food security, not only food security in Brazil, but in other parts of the world. During this period, during the last 5 decades, Brazil moved from being a food insecure country to become one of the powerhouses in food, fiber, and bioenergy production. And the secret was that Brazil invested consistently in research and development, in agricultural research and development. Science, technology, and innovation made a fantastic revolution in Brazil. And this revolution can be summarized in 3 pillars, if I may. One was the transformation of poor, acidic soils into fertile land. And that happened basically in the Brazilian savanna, we call the Cerrado, which is an area that is very similar to the savannas that we have in many countries in Africa. The second pillar was the adaptation of plants and animals to the tropical climate. We adapted soybean to the tropical climate. We adapted corn, grasses for animal feed, and we also adapted the Indian and European cows for the production of beef and milk in Brazil. One of the last achievements that I'm really glad to share with you was the adaptation and the development of the tropical wheat. As you know, wheat provides 1/5 of the calories consumed nowadays worldwide. At least 2 reports published recently in the Wall Street Journal and the Economist addressed Embrapa's tropical wheat. The tropical wheat varieties developed by Embrapa are grown in tropical areas ranging from 15 degrees of south latitude to 4 degrees of north latitude. Irrigated wheat, using Embrapa's genetics, were able to produce 9.6 tons per hectare, 9.6 tons of wheat per hectare, which it was a world record. And we are also growing this tropical wheat under no irrigated conditions and getting 2.3 to 3.5 tons per hectare. So adapting acidic soils and transforming acidic soils into fertile land adapting different plants and animals to tropical conditions. And the third pillar was the development of a sustainable platform of practices. So no-till technology, biological fixation, integrated crop, livestock, and forestry systems, just to give some examples. And coming to the end of my first intervention here, because we did all this investment in research, development, innovation, and because we have a very active private sector in Brazil, entrepreneurs and growers that are very open to use technology. Nowadays, Brazil feeds more than 800 million people around the globe, and we also protect 2/3 of our territory. So we are helping feed the world, and we are helping also the environment, protecting or preserving 2/3 of our territory. Brazil invested consistently in Embrapa, in agriculture R&D. Currently we have 8,000 employees, 2,200 researchers, 43 research centers, 93 breeding programs, and a portfolio of 1,100 R&D projects. So I'll stop here, and on the second question, I can bring more information and share more of our experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moratti. Thank you for being very concise and to the point. I've taken note of the key messages. I'll come back to you later in the second round to ask specific areas where we can develop South cooperation between Embrapa and our member countries. But before the second round, let me go to OCP, Mr. Lahsen. We've heard today the importance of soil fertility. We also do know about our member countries because of their localities where they are located and rising temperatures. We do see losing or soil erosion at rates that we have not seen in the past. We currently, based on the data I have here, our member countries, or globally, in fact, we have lost 24 billion tons last year of fertile soil. So the soil fertility is a key to raising productivity and production. And this is what OCP does. They provide, fertilizers to the smallholder farmers in the continent. So Mr. Lahsen, welcome again. Can you please tell us how we can improve that soil fertility dilemma that we have in our member countries? We also did see rising costs of fertilizers during this recent supply shocks post-COVID. And how can we get these fertilizers to the smallholder farmers in ways that we can have an impact? They are costly, but they are also important if we were to raise productivity. What are some of the innovations that you have on the ground working with our member countries in deploying more fertilizers to smallholder farmers? If you can share with us, I know you are working on some innovations around blending, fertilizer blending factories that you have in some regions in our constituency. If you can share some of these and what are practical solutions to addressing this issue of soil fertility from the OCP perspective. The floor is yours. Do we have Mr. Lahsen in the call? I don't see him. Okay, we'll move to Olam, and when he joins, we'll address the question to him. Olam, thank you, Arjit. John, it's a pleasure to have you on the call. We have not met before, but thank you for joining us. We know that you represent an important stakeholder that everybody spoke about today in terms of funding, in terms of smallholder farmer markets to linkages to markets. At Olam, you must be doing something really amazing in moving the supply chain going during, of course, the pandemic, but also in recent years by linking millions of smallholder farmers to markets, even though you work only in cocoa industry and coffee, but also this model could be replicated using stable crops. The current crisis really showed us how fragile our food systems is and the importance of the private sector in making sure that the supply chains are effective or operational. Can you please share with us some of the innovations that you have? What made an institution like Olam so effective to link smallholder farmers to markets when many others, including MDBs, are struggling getting these farmers linked to markets? And how can we structure models that can bring you on board to co-finance investments or projects with MDBs like the Islamic Development Bank? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdi, first of all, for the invitation. I would like to greet all the panel members, Your Excellencies, and I'm actually really amazed that different actors of the supply chain have a similar thought process where people are talking about resilient agricultural practices, or if it is about protecting against climate change. In the last 1.5 years, we have seen a couple of other challenges also coming across. Most importantly, the freight, that is the movement of goods. So as per a study done by IMF over 30 years, 0.7% increase in inflation globally happens by just doubling of the freight rate. And we are actually passing through that phase today. So the world has been focused on driving agricultural productivity. Today, the problem is not only feeding the 9 billion people, which I believe can be fed with all the produce which happens globally, but still around 811 million people are sleeping on empty stomachs because it's not available to them in their regions. Along with that, it's a complex set of challenges. It's extreme weather due to climate change, food waste, which is one of the biggest contributor to this problem statement today, which I would suggest on how we can together work and solve the problem. Then trade patterns, political challenges, and worst of all, the conflict, which is threatening to push more and more people into hunger. What can be done actually? First and foremost, it's a change of mindset. We believe that breaking the silos where research companies focus on coming out with the best seed varieties, ministries trying to use those seed varieties and make it available to private sector, who can take it onwards to the farmers. So I would be really happy to hear from our esteemed panelist, Dr. Celso, how they have using Embrapa, where they've made this research available to the smallholder. Not necessarily a smallholder in case of Brazil, but it would be very pertinent question for a sub-Saharan African farmer. So all the agricultural transformation, the latest farming techniques that we have been talking about, in particular, linking that with the climate research. I will particularly talk of agroforestry here. That what is the, is it only focusing on wheat production, or is it also ensuring that the land and the water table in that area with the use of forestries, can that be developed in a sustainable manner? And finally, the food loss and overall supply chain. So I believe it's important to go local here. The production of local carbohydrates, whether it is wheat or cassava, how can that be pushed in those particular societies? It will first of all reduce the overall wastage in the supply chain. So around 14% of the food is lost alone between harvest and the retail. And whatever reaches the retail stores, around 17% is lost till the time it reaches us or into a restaurant, for example. So reducing this wastage by coming up with efficient supply chains, that's the need of the hour. So as a company, Olam, we have, our business model has been focused on ensuring the smallholders get the maximum amount of value for their produce. If my farmer or my partnering cooperative, if they make money in the trade, then it will be a sustainable trade. All the agricultural research that we are talking about, a smallholder farmer first needs to look at the evidence how much more money can he or she make. So that has been the approach for us as an organization. We have also had exceptional research done by our colleagues. So, for example, in cocoa, we have come out with a farmer sustainability manual for the whole of West Africa. And our training program to increase yields is focused on all of these different aspects. So our team of 50 strong regional representatives who are working closely with close to 100,000 farmers in Cote d'Ivoire alone, they use this manual in a structured format, and farmers are seeing improved yields. In the second part of the discussion, I will take you through a couple of examples which we have in Olam supply chain in Nigeria as well as in Ghana. So I hope it helps address all the questions, and in case more questions come up, we can always take it later.
Thank you, Arjit. Very insightful. We'll come back to you on how we can integrate smallholder farmers, staples plus cash crops in terms of the farming systems. I know that you focus only on those cash crops, cocoa and coffee, but how can we build the capacity of those smallholder farmers so we can increase this productivity of the staples? Thank you for the insights. We'll do the second round. This will be a very quick firing session. I will be asking questions follow up to the previous questions. And please take a time to summarize for us what are the key messages that you want us to take with us from this session today. So I will start again the same sequence, then we'll probably go to, if we have a time, and I think we will be able to go to our participants with a round of questions. I do have a couple of them in the chat, in the Q&A box. But let me go to the Minister, Minister Gaston. Thank you so much for elaborating the strategy of the government of Benin in terms of increasing productivity. What caught my my attention was your reference to the production systems, the regions, how you divide the country to focus on not only the staples, but also you mentioned pineapple and other cash crops. Can you speak to the importance of the private sector engagement with regard to the agricultural processing zones that you made reference to? How do you see an institution like the bank could support you bring in investments where we can de-risk the private sector financing on behalf of the government in terms of PPP structuring around financing of value chains, particularly focusing on the infrastructure component of the investments from an institution like Islamic Development Bank? The floor is yours, Your Excellency. Translation team, if you want me to repeat the question, let me know.
Dr. Noor, do you hear me?
Oh, Mulai, welcome. Yes, I'll come back to you. Thank you for joining us. Let's hear from the minister first, then we'll come to you. Thank you for joining. We'll go to the minister, Minister Gaston from Benin.
Merci, chers amis. D'abord, il faut partir du principe que le secteur privé crée en réalité les emplois. Et c'est justement ce que nous avons compris pour qu'au niveau du programme d'action du gouvernement du Bénin, une part belle soit faite au secteur privé à s'intéresser à la transformation de notre agriculture. Mais pour y parvenir, pour attirer les investisseurs, il y a un certain nombre de préalables que nous devons régler. C'est d'abord la question de la sécurité foncière. La sécurisation foncière sans laquelle aucun investisseur ne peut oser s'engager et mettre de l'argent dans les infrastructures. À cet effet, nous avons une agence nationale de développement du foncier qui, au fait, est né de la réforme foncière. La réforme qui a permis de mettre en place un code foncier domanial pour développer des outils afin de numériser et de sécuriser les espaces. Cela améliore la capacité à mobiliser le foncier en faveur des investissements agricoles, par exemple. La deuxième mesure importante qu'il faut prendre, c'est les mesures fiscales et non fiscales incitatives en faveur du secteur privé pour l'importation des intrants agricoles pour la production végétale, la production animale, la production halieutique, le matériel agricole, les exportations de produits et dérivés pour la promotion de ces entreprises de transformation. Donc, il y a eu des exonérations fiscales. Il y a la loi des finances de chaque année qui définissent effectivement les mesures fiscales favorisant donc ces investissements-là. Nous avons eu à adopter une loi spécifique sur l'investissement dans le secteur agricole. Et ainsi, il y a une loi sur le partenariat public-privé, la PPP, et une loi sur le code des investissements qui offre des conditions incitatives aux investisseurs. Compte tenu de la prépondérance donc du secteur agricole dans notre économie, la prépondérance surtout du secteur agro-silvopastoral, le secteur privé a eu cette facilité pour booster un peu la production. J'ai parlé tout à l'heure de la zone spéciale économique qui est en fait une passerelle pour l'amélioration du climat des affaires. Le DGA de Olam en sait quelque chose. Et à ce niveau, on est en train de développer quand même une certaine facilitation pour aider les gens à assurer une transformation domestique de nos produits. Une autre condition importante, c'est l'organisation des acteurs dans les chaînes de valeur. En vérité, il est plus facile pour un opérateur de s'adresser à des groupements de producteurs organisés pour capter la matière première ou mettre en place un certain nombre de facteurs facilitant la production que de s'adresser individuellement aux opérateurs. Voilà, en quelques mots, ce que nous sommes en train de mettre en œuvre pour aider l'investissement, pour faciliter l'investissement dans le secteur. Dans tous les cas, à côté de tout ça, il y a les questions essentielles de l'énergie que nous réglons, bien sûr, la question de la communication que nous réglons aujourd'hui parce que vous ne pouvez pas demander à des jeunes d'aller s'installer à la campagne lorsque lui ne peut pas téléphoner facilement à un autre copain, lorsqu'il ne peut pas envoyer de l'argent ou recevoir de l'argent par mobile. Là, vous ne pouvez pas amener les gens à l'agriculture. Il faut créer ces facilités-là, mais en même temps, un autre environnement incitatif pour que le secteur privé qui crée les emplois réellement puisse s'installer. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Excellency, for the practical insights on what the government is doing with respect to that. And I do take a note that we are working with your government in scaling some of the investments that we have to promote this agricultural processing zones, especially for cassava. It's very enlightening, or at least refreshing, to hear from you that digitalization and ICT technology integration into the farming systems will be a priority for the government. But also you have highlighted the importance of energy, which is quite important in terms of processing industry for agriculture. Thank you, Your Excellency, for taking the time with us. Please stay with us. We'll be wrapping the session in the next 40 minutes. I'll go quickly to Dr. Hakim Al-Wa'ar from FAO. Dr. Hakim, quickly, what are the key messages that you will leave with us with respect to, you have mentioned the SDGs. The UN is the custodian of the SDGs. Of course, we all participate, contribute to its implementation and financing. But you being the custodian of the SDGs, where do you see the key priorities now moving forward, given the fact that we have a lot of setbacks due to the lingering pandemic effects, but also the rising food prices and the poverty in our member countries now? If you were to give us key areas of focus with respect to the SDGs, addressing this issue of employment, productivity, and hunger, over to you. And 3 minutes, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Noor. Noor, I think you're addressing a very important issue, and that is where to go if we want to achieve food security. I think building resilience becomes really a priority. And in order to do that in today's terms, and in light of what I highlighted earlier in terms of the current financing gap, we need to engage more and more private sector. And the latest strategy, or the new strategy for the FAO on the private sector engagement, highlights how at least the agriculture and food security sector can engage with the private sector in the agri-food systems. Now, that by itself is not enough. We need to deepen the collaboration between the different stakeholders, including the development community, the research and development institutions such as ICPA, and I'm glad to see Dr. Tarifa here with us. Because we need the innovative solutions that we can implement together, but also ensure access to finance. Access to finance in rural areas, and I repeat, investment in water infrastructure for agriculture are key if we want to sustain and increase our productivity to face the challenges of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hakim, for taking good note of those points. Because of time, I'm going to move on to Dr. Lahsan of OCP. Then I will go to Dr. Moretti and, of course, Mr. Arjit Jan to conclude before we go to the Q&A session, if we do have a time, and closing remarks by Dr. Tarif Al-Azabi. Dr. Lahsan, welcome. I think you've joined the session late. We are almost at the tail end of the webinar. Quick question. Everybody spoke about the importance of fertilizers if we were to increase productivity of the smallholder farmers. We know that OCP has deployed certain innovations in West Africa in terms of fertilizer blending. Can you share some of those technologies, and how can we take this to scale if you were to partner with an institution like Islamic Development Bank in supporting our member countries with respect to increasing productivity of agriculture, particularly crops and stable crops, to be precise? Over to you, Mr. Lahsan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Noor. And I want to, first of all, to thank Dr. Mansour and you for inviting us to be part of that side event. It seems that, do you hear me? I didn't have the authorization to participate as the panelist that you asked me. So if I can limit myself just to, let's say, 3 or 4 initiatives, because the sake of the time. We have developed the research. One of the research development program we are pushing is the customization. We are pushing to make sure that we will apply the right fertilizer with the right dose, the right time to the right needs. This is very important because this will have, of course, the impact on the cost of the fertilizer. It will reduce the cost of the fertilizer. It will have an impact on the productivity. That means it will increase the revenue of the farmers. And of course, it will have positive impact because it will reduce the losses that can, have negative impact. So we are pushing that, and we are doing a lot of research development in many countries. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that there will be some local industry that can be able to produce this customized formula. That will, because customized formula, that means it's, less volumes. They are not big volumes. Of course, the industry cannot do that. That is why we are pushing to have some local blending unit in the countries. And we have 2 approaches. The first one is we are developing our own blending unit, but this is not our preference. Our preference is to partner or to push the local partners, the private sector, local private sector to do that. And of course, we are providing them all the technical assistance that they need or the training that they need to make their business, profitable. So that is one of our initiatives. We all know the crisis and the shortage. We are talking about the shortage and the price increase of the fertilizer. We all know the origin of that. We just give you an example, the raw material, the ammonia, for example, and the sulfur, they are increased by 3 times since January 2021. And one of the good initiative that we have put in place with some government that put them, really don't suffer from the crisis that we have. We have heard the Honorable Minister of Agriculture in Benin. For example, Benin doesn't suffer from what other countries knows because they have been able to plan and to secure their volumes, their needs earlier, before even the increase of the prices. So that is what we call, this defined the annual contract of the supply. OCP, despite the shortage of the raw material, despite the disruption in supply chain, we have been able to supply 80% of the needs for Africa. For example, we have supplied 100% of the needs of Ethiopia, 100% of the needs of Benin. We have also supplied 100% of needs in Nigeria. And thanks to the agreement that we have, for example, with the government of Nigeria that secure the supply, whether however the volatility of the prices is, and we have been able to secure that. So this is very important initiative to have this annual predefined contract. And what we do also to make sure that the farmers will have access to the fertilizer to be affordable to them, we developed what we call the hub farmers. It's really the last mile, and we make sure that it's one-stop shop where the farmers just within less than 10 kilometers can find all not only the product, not only the fertilizer, but also the seeds, and not only the product, but also all the assistance, the training. And we also develop what we call the entrepreneurs in agribusiness that are leading these farmer hubs. They are in contact, they are trained people, farmers. They are also even in charge of taking their product. What also we have developed as a flagship program is what we call AgriBooster. AgriBooster is an end-to-end solution that secure the first of 10 is the access to the market. And I heard the minister of Benin talking about the transformation. I hear also our brother from Egypt, Dr. Said, talking about the transformation of the product. So the access to the market is the key. So what we secure is the access to market. We define, we find, or we identify some aggregators locally that are needing, the products. We bring all the actors, the one who will supply the seeds, the one who will supply, of course, the fertilizer, and also access to the finance. So what we have developed with African Development Bank, we put in place risk sharing facility where OCP take 50% of the risk. And the pilot initiative that we have put in place is will be applied in Ivory Coast and in Ghana. It's 4 years, and at least 100 of the farmers, agriculture, they have access to the finance thanks to that initiative. That's what I want to say. That
Thank you.
Private sector have also to take some risks in helping that, because finance is a key, and everybody has to contribute to that.
Thank you, Monsieur Lahsen, for the intervention. I always, when I talk to your colleagues in OCP, I tell them that when we go to rural areas and remote areas in our member countries, you will find a Coca-Cola or Fanta. but farmers don't have access to fertilizers. So I'm very happy, and I know some of the school demonstration facilities or the tracks that you have in showcasing how the farmers can have access to fertilizer, but also the impact of fertilizers in remote areas is very commendable. I look forward to engaging with you how we can deepen this and facilitate access to fertilizer for our member countries. Thank you, Mr. Lassen. Let me quickly, we do have less than 10 minutes. We will try to condense as much as possible the remaining speakers. With apologies to Dr. Moretti, over to you. In the first round, I asked if we can identify areas where we can develop this partnership between Imbraba and our member countries' research institutes. You've mentioned in the first round that you do have significant amount of investment that goes to research and development in Brazil. Can you highlight if this is public financing or you also do have financing from the industry, from the private sector? And how can we strengthen the institutions in our member countries so we can crowd in financing from the private sector into the research systems, the NARS in the South, so to speak? Key messages, if you don't mind, and we'll limit this into 2 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Moretti, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, we have funds that come from the public sector, the Brazilian government, and funding federal and state agencies in Brazil. And that's probably is now funding 60% of our portfolio of projects. But the private sector, we also have funds from the private sector, and we have around 40% of our portfolio of R&D funded by the private sector. By the way, we have an agreement with OCP, and this is one of our key partners. And Embrapa has a long story, a long and productive history of collaboration with different African countries. As we develop technology for the tropical belt of the world, a region where many African countries are located, it is possible, and it was possible to adapt and transfer technology developed by Embrapa to different African countries. In the last 2 decades, we participated in projects in Togo, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Benin, focusing the production of cotton. And also in partnership with USAID and JICA, we work in Mozambique, in the outskirts of Maputo, and in the Nacala corridor. 3 weeks ago, and I'm just wrapping up now, 3 weeks ago, I visited Morocco and Egypt. As I mentioned, we have an ongoing partnership with OCP and UM6P from Morocco. We also signed an agreement with the Agricultural Research Center in Egypt, and the Egyptians are very interested in testing Embrapa's tropical wheat. And as you asked at the end of your question, what would be the takeaway messages? So 3 takeaway messages. First, investments in agriculture R&D are strategic to provide food security to countries worldwide. The case of Embrapa in Brazil is a very good example of the importance of robust and consistent investment. Institutional building and capacity building are also of paramount importance to move towards feeding a growing population. And finally, bilateral and/or trilateral cooperation are key to achieve these goals. Embrapa and Brazil are open to collaborate and to work with other countries to build the conditions for food security. Thank you very much for the opportunity once again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Moretti. And we look forward to having an MOU with you. We'll discuss that offline. But thank you again for joining the call. Finally, let me go to our final panel speaker, Jane Arjit. Can you please speak to this issue of private sector, crowding in private sector into the food systems and key messages? We heard from Embrapa that 40% of the investments in research, at least in the Embrapa systems, comes from the private sector. And you spoke about the need to link research to forestry, for example, the example that you use, how can we improve that linkages? As a private sector, how can we engage with you to strengthen these food systems from research to market?
Thank you very much for this question and opportunity once again. Like His Excellency Gaston from Benin highlighted, it all starts with the right policy formulation. If there is right policy, it will attract private sector coming into the economy, into the nation. And the role of private sector is not just linked to contributing cash towards research and development. For me, the biggest advantage of having large scale private sector companies is connecting this research and these funds directly to the supply chain by removing middlemen actually. So for Olam, we are contributing heavily actually in most of our projects in capacity building. So we are bringing research on cocoa, as I mentioned earlier, connecting them to over 100,000 farmers in Cote d'Ivoire alone. I will give you a couple of examples. In Nigeria, over the past few years, we have partnered with the Nigerian government and the United Nations International Fund for Agricultural Development under the Value Chain Development Program. The main focus is to improve the farmer livelihood. So as a group, we feel a richer farmer will ensure a prosperous society and automatically instill the good agricultural practices adoption. So since 2019, some of the key findings, the rice yield in that zone has increased by 125%. As I talked about the losses in the supply chain. So post-harvest losses have been reduced by 70% thanks to the improved storage facilities. In all, it has tripled the farmer income. Further, 5,000 women have reported improved quality in their diet. So these are some of the key messages out of this one program alone. Similar example from Ghana, where we are working in the Sui River Forest Reserve by supporting 10,000 cocoa farmers to increase their yields once again. So while we may be, or me personally, I may be operating in cocoa, but our focus remains in uplifting the whole community. So along with the sustainable program for cocoa, we are also distributing fortified variety of manioc, which ensures the community takes care of it. We are developing youth gangs who help farmers provide pruning services. We set up village saving loan associations, which are primarily driven by women who may use money collected by the community in coming up with the other food crops, which again are part of this setup. And finally, I would like to emphasize on the need of digital transformation, right? As His Excellency Gaston also mentioned, why a digital payment mechanism and infrastructure is key for revolutionizing agriculture. So we in Olam, we have come up with many in-house systems like Olam Farmer Information System, where most of the farmer with their demographic information is already registered on this IT system. We reach to them through the partnering cooperatives, collect all the information. And at the end of the day, we try and project a profit and loss statement to the farmer. So all in all, this shows the evolution of the earnings of the farmer over the years, setting the context right, why adopting best agricultural practices and all the research which has been done by entities like Embrapa, why that is the way forward. So for us, we are, I would say, one of the biggest enablers in transforming the smallholders, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but companies like us can connect the research and the funds on the execution side. So that would be the key message which I would like to drive today.
Thank you, Mr. Ajit. I'm very grateful that you have concluded in that note. Well, this brings us to the end of the panel discussion. I'm very sorry that we do not have a time to get questions from participants. We had a full house. We started around 70 and we ended around 70. So this tells you the engagement from participants. Thank you all for your critical insights, expertise, and your generosity. You shared a lot of time and lessons and knowledge with us. We are very thankful to you all, our speakers, and of course, the participants who have came to attend the session. We will continue the discussion and dialogue beyond today. expect an email from me. I will be reaching out to each one of you individually, and we will explore areas, of collaboration moving forward. Once again, thank you so much from me and the team at the Islamic Development Bank. Let me hand over to my colleague, Dr. Tarifa Zaabi, who is the DG and acting DG and deputy DG of the International Center for Biosalient Agriculture for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, honorable ministers, excellencies, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly honored to be part of today's webinar. It has brought together such distinguished and diverse cohort of experts and thoughtful leaders. It is timely discussion indeed. And while many countries are still recovering from the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on their economies, we are now faced by prospect of a global food crisis due to the conflict in Ukraine. And also we continue to face challenges with the climate change. It is becoming clear, of course, from our discussion and agreement that we must find systematic solution for the shortcomings of our agri-food system. We need to save lives and livelihood. It is crucially important to take urgent action to build resilience into our agri-food system, of which is developing, adopting agri-innovations, but also diversifying into unutilized and neglected crops, which is very important. And this is really where it was really important for us to hear today the discussion positively and crucially mentioned the investment in research and development, scientific research and development in agriculture. And also, this is what ICBA has been really supporting and doing for the last decades. We are committed to continuing to provide our expertise and know-how and building capabilities and capacities to contribute to food security efforts in different regions. In conclusion, I wish to express our gratitude to all participants for their invaluable contributions and insight, and thank the organizing committee, of course, for putting such a wonderful discussion today, an interesting program. Thank you very much and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to all participants. Wish you a good day. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Alaikum assalam.
Thank you. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you to all the participants and the panel members. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Your Excellency VP Mansour, for
participating. Thank you for your contribution for the partnership. We hope we can enhance the partnership that exists between the various organizations that have been involved in this for the benefit of our member countries. We appreciate. And special thanks to ICBA, of course, for partnering with us on this and for being a long-term partner in driving this important agenda. Thank you. Thank you, Noor, for your effective facilitation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for staying throughout, Dr. Mansour. Thank you for honoring us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Have a good day.